All righty, let's get started. Again, for those of you whom I've not had the pleasure of meeting, my name is Dottie Summerfield Justy, and it is my pleasure to chair or co-chair the Small Business Council of the Greater Memphis Chamber. Um, I want to introduce my co-chair, whom we are slightly connected at the hip, arms, legs. We don't know when we're ever separated. Patricia McKinney.
Absolutely. Thank you all so much for being a part of this great conversation that we have planned for you. We could not do what we do without support, and we want to just show our appreciation to our Small Business Council program sponsor, Independent Bank. And today we have Jeff Kimbrough, who is with us today. Jeff, I'm going to turn it over to you to give a few words to our attendees.
Thank you, Patricia. It's always great to see you guys. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Jeff Kimbrough with Independent Bank, and as title sponsor, we are grateful that everyone was able to join us today. One thing I love about this organization is our ability to serve our clients. And of course, we have uncertain times, and during this pandemic, relationships with our clients have become much stronger. We're continuing to find innovative ways to be a resource to our clients. And which in other words, is basically we're striving to be heroic. And when I say heroic, two things come to mind: responsibility and shared community. These are some of the things that I think that we truly care about, and two things that help us serve our clients heroically. So I really want to take time to thank you all for joining us, because I believe we have an extremely great and important topic or conversation this afternoon on diversity, equity, and inclusion, and boosting your bottom line. So again, thank you all for joining us. If there's anything at Independent Bank we can do for you, or if we can be a resource to you, your business, your employees, let's connect. So give Independent Bank the opportunity to serve you heroically. And thank you all, and stay safe.
Thanks, Jeff. Thanks so very, very much.
Thank you.
So especially for those that this is your first time joining us at a Small Business Council meeting, when we started and geared back up the Small Business Council at the latter part of last year, the beginning of this year, we formed a group that we call our think tank. And without our think tank members, and if any of you are here, I can't tell from the attendee list, without them, we meet on a monthly basis, and those think tank members bring to us the ideas for programming. They are all small business owners. They touch base with all of their fellow small business owners. And we know that we're getting a good cross section of the community when we reach out to put the emphasis on things that are important. At our very first meeting of the year, it was echoed throughout the entire think tank: diversity, equity, inclusion, and how it affects our bottom line. We're all small businesses. We are not big businesses, but our bottom lines are affected the same way. I want to thank my think tank members for all of their time and their effort. And Patricia, I'd like to turn it back to you for a second.
Thank you, Dottie. So following the first protest in Memphis after the death of George Floyd, the Greater Memphis Chamber, under the leadership of Beverly Robertson, convened 60 business executives, clergy leaders, and activists at the National Civil Rights Museum for a very powerful session with the activists. This conversation birthed the initiative Protest to Progress. What better time to share the developments that were done during this time and all of the work that has been put into this initiative than during this conversation we're having today about diversity, equity, and inclusion. I want to give the floor to our president and CEO, Beverly Robertson, as she shares highlights of our Protest to Progress. Beverly?
Beverly will join us in a minute, and through the magic of telecommunications, once again, we have a glitch. I don't know if any of you have ever seen a glitch in this world of Zoom and Zoom communications. Beverly will be joining us in just a second. Amy Daniels, are you here? I'd like to introduce Amy Daniels, if I could, to those of you who've not had the pleasure of meeting her.
Coming live from my closet. Welcome, everyone. We are so happy to have you here. And we are, what a year it has been for all of us to get used to Zoom. Beverly is having a small problem logging in. So we will get that going as soon as she joins. Dottie and Patricia, if okay with you, and forgive me everyone that's on the line right now, if okay with you, could we go on and start introducing, I was going to say introducing the panelists, but forget it. Ladies and gentlemen, Patricia, from the top, why don't you do one more intro for Madam President?
Yes. So Beverly, as I was saying, there was a very powerful conversation that took place between 60 business leaders, clergy individuals, and they were convened together because of your leadership. So I want to turn the floor over to you to talk about all of the work that has been done in the space of protest to progress. And you're muted.
I've got it. So good afternoon, everybody, and welcome. And it's so good to see so many familiar pictures since I don't see your faces quite yet, but I'm looking forward to seeing many of you. And let me just share with you that Memphis has always had a very activist community back in the civil rights area as well as today, which really is being continued by a number of activist groups. So after the march in downtown that really erupted in just a broken window at a storefront, I knew that our activists were extremely unhappy and that perhaps no one was really listening to them. So I had the opportunity to convene a group of them less than 10 days after that first protest in Memphis. And we convened 60 business leaders, activists, and members of the clergy at the National Civil Rights Museum for a powerful listening session with the activist community. And it was awesome. At the first meeting, it was interesting. We told everybody else to be quiet. And you know how ministers are. It is very difficult for ministers to be quiet, but they were this particular time. We laid the ground rules. We decided that we didn't want any photos taken. We didn't want anybody capturing anything for social media. We didn't want any media present because we want to have an open, honest conversation. Now, why was this important for us to do? Well, it was important because many of the issues that the activists had were really about economic equity. That's why we invited the business community to the table. And at first I thought I wouldn't get any takers on the business community side, but I think we ended up with about 8 or 9 business leaders actually coming to the table to participate in the conversations. And I also recognize that you certainly can't attract new investment with higher wage jobs if the city is burning and trying to recover from riots. It took us nearly 10 years to fully recover from that downturn of 2008. And there's no telling how long it would take if indeed the city was on fire. So after that first meeting where the activists talked, they identified a number of issues that we summarized. They were housing and healthcare and transportation. And so at the second meeting, we heard from the business leaders and the clergy. And after that meeting, the third meeting resulted in us summarizing the issues and boiling them down to 4 major issues that the activists and the clergy and business leaders felt impacted the outcomes of what's happening in the Memphis community. And that included wealth equity or community reinvestment, MWBE contracting, living wage, and corporate and community board participation. Once those issues were identified, we created 4 subgroups around each of those issues with 2 business leaders co-leading each. Activists sometimes were in 2 and 3 of those meetings because this discussion occurred over an 8 to 10 week period. And it was pretty incredible. And I have to tell you, it was not without a great deal of passion on the part of the activists. At one of the meetings, one of the activists got really, really upset and disturbed and said, I'm tired of talking. And I mean, the business community felt the ire of him. And I thought that many of them wouldn't come back to the table. I got 2 calls at home that night from business leaders that said, I'm staying at the table. I have never heard this level of passion from anybody about their community and what their community needs. So after meeting with the small groups, we came up with a series of action plans. And those action plans that were developed in each one of those 4 pillar areas were done to make sure that 1, we understood what the issues were, 2, that we could shape some plans around it, timeline it, and then 3, build some accountability around it. And that is precisely what has happened. We've taken those action plans and we've developed action steps. We've built partnerships in the community, and we are going to have a meeting on June 3rd that will be the first of 2 meetings that will make us accountable for many of those actions that we talked about doing. So at this June 3rd meeting, the chamber team will report in each one of these pillars the actions that have been taken and the next steps that are yet to be taken. And while I think this is extremely significant for Memphis and for the activists and clergy and business community, I will tell you that some of the best outcomes from that meeting resulted from the mutual respect that was developed, the relationship building that came about as a result of it, a greater awareness and understanding of the issues that many of the business leaders never touch, never see every day, but they are felt by people who live in grassroots communities who struggle just to survive every day. So there was a pricking of the consciousness of all of the people who were involved in the process. And while I realize that this is certainly not a silver bullet, but it has been said that the journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step. This is a single step. The chamber has led the charge. We are taking this step, and we believe if we stay on it and if we remain vigilant and accountable, some of the changes that can result from this work can be and will be sustainable over time. And I know I don't have time to take questions. Some of you may have lots of questions about this, but I will also tell you that we will be presenting this on a panel in Nashville, October 3rd through 7th that week, because Nashville will be hosting for the first time the International Economic Development Conference in Nashville, Tennessee. And a lot of the global people who are working with this effort are amazed by the work that has been done in Memphis, Tennessee. So we're inviting an activist, a representative from the clergy, a business leader to join us in Nashville as we continue to talk about not only what the actions are, but the things that have been done at this point. There will be 2 meetings on an annual basis moving forward, and in future meetings, not only will we report on the actions, but we'll identify new action steps and maybe even new issues that need to be taken. And I would simply close by saying this: the purpose of your Greater Memphis Chamber is to relentlessly pursue prosperity for all. This is but one action toward that end. And I will end my remarks with that. Thank you so much. Appreciate you listening.
Beverly, thank you very, very much. And I think we're all going to be very excited to hear what next steps are and what comes out. And thank you for joining us today.
Thank you.
Okay, everybody, here we go. And it's going to be my pleasure today to introduce our moderator and our speakers for today's panel: diversity, equity, inclusion, and how it can boost your bottom line. First, let me introduce our moderator, Renee Malone, President of KQ Communications, Gwendolyn Tucker with RICS International, Adrian Johnson-Williams, Standpoint Consulting, Lawrence Jones, Founder, President of Riskversity, and Latasha Dexter, University of Memphis, Deputy Legal Counsel. I'm going to turn the program over to Renee. And once again, if any of you attending have any questions, comments, please hit them in the chat to either me or Patricia McKinney, and we'll try our best to get all of those questions in at the end of the panel. Thank you so much.
All right, Dottie, thank you for the introduction and thank you all for joining us. We are very excited to start this panel discussion. It's an honor to join with this extremely knowledgeable panel who's poised to share a wealth of information here today. So without further ado, Latasha Dexter will be our first presenter and share a few examples of costly lawsuits. Yes, it is costly when we're operating with poor DEI related decisions. So Latasha, it's all yours.
Thanks, Renee. Of course, we start with legal, because if you can't get people to do right for the right reasons, then you figure out how to scare them into doing right. Usually when I'm doing this, having this conversation, what I am talking about is the financial impact. Because I've learned in my 20+ years of defending employers and employment discrimination claims is that even if individuals can't understand the value of DEI, they can understand the value of money lost, right? And so there's a financial impact that every business incurs when they have an employment discrimination claim brought against them. And employment discrimination and wrongful termination lawsuits are the most common lawsuits filed against small business. And that's for a variety of reasons, but typically because small businesses don't have the resources to have trained human resources professionals, as well as to make sure that they have some of the compliance components in place that they need to have. Even if you look at these statistics, just the EEOC, which is the federal arm, received 2,300 charges of discrimination against Tennessee employers in fiscal year 2020. And the THRC, which is the state arm, received 781 inquiries and 302 complaints were filed. What this means for a small to medium-sized business is money and time. The average claim requires 318 days to be resolved, with defense and settlement costs averaging $160,000. How many of you have 318 days to spend defending an employment discrimination claim? That's money, that's time, those are resources that you need to reinvest into your business, that you're having to take the time to invest in defending a claim. Next slide. But more importantly, I think the people impact precedes the financial impact. Yes, I'm a lawyer by trade, but one of the things I always tell employers is I don't care how much you have compliance in place. If your people are not happy, even if you're complying with the black letter of the law, if your people aren't happy, there's an impact there. And that employee impact, that people impact is very important, especially from a DEI strategy standpoint. And so when we talk about employee relations and engagement, your diversity or lack thereof impacts employee relations and engagements. If you think about it, lack of diversity in decision makers ensures that you have a culture where diversity is not being taken into consideration when you make decisions. The EEOC in a 2016 report that they did on harassment found that harassment claims were more likely to happen in companies that have a lack of diversity. And that makes sense. Think about it. If you have a company that is made up of all men and you have 1 or 2 women there, their voice, and especially if they aren't in management, their voices aren't being heard. Men may not be as sensitive to the needs as far as pregnancy leave or caregiver leave that women are more impacted by. The other thing to keep in mind is that that diversity or lack thereof impacts employee relations and engagement. And so then you have dissatisfied or disgruntled employees. And those employees that feel they don't fit the make and model that you've established as part of your culture are more likely to file those employment discrimination claims. What I always tell employers when I'm doing training is when people can't understand why an adverse decision was made, they usually try to find a reason, and it's usually something that they can easily identify. And what they can easily identify is that there's no one else here that looks like me, or that acts like me, or that believes the things that I believe. And so it has to be for that reason that this action was taken against me. Next slide. And so then the other financial impact is on employee retention. Dissatisfied or disgruntled employees are going to leave, and employee turnover is costly. You've got employees who are not happy because decisions are being made that don't take into account their diverse characteristics. You have employees who are upset that because they don't feel a part of your culture, because they don't see anyone that they can relate to. And so those employees leave, and there's a cost to that. The cost of hiring a new employee, including the advertising, interviewing, screening, and hiring, the cost of onboarding, lost productivity, training costs, and then, like I said, the people impact. If your people are not happy at their job, they're not going to be productive. And people are going to be happy in an environment that they feel is diverse and that respects their differences and is inclusive of those differences.
Got it. Thank you, Latasha. And I was kind of listening and so caught. I was like, whoa, she's finished. But Latasha, before we move on to the next one, could you just clarify what you meant by those who don't fit the make and model, just so everyone is clear?
Right. So I kind of compare it to a car dealership, right? If you're going to Toyota, you expect to find Camrys and Corollas, right? And so you've got a couple of Corollas, which are your line workers, and then your Camrys is your management. When that Nissan Sentra gets dropped off on the lot, everybody's looking around like, this doesn't fit, this doesn't belong. And the Nissan Sentra feels it too, right? So it doesn't fit the make and model. And so when you have employees who are going into a work environment where there's no one that looks like them, no one that shares the beliefs that they share, and even if the lack of diversity is not there, but they also don't feel included, then they feel like they don't fit the make and model, and they're not going to be happy. They don't have anybody they can relate to. They don't have anybody that they can talk to or feel comfortable talking to, unless that olive branch is extended to them to make them know that they are included in this environment. And so those are the employees that are more likely to file claims against an employer.
Wonderful. Thank you for that additional context. And as folks are listening, feel free to drop questions. And so we'll get to those toward the end as we go through each of these presentations. I'm sure many questions are going to come to mind. You'll be able to talk to the panelists a little bit later. And so, of course, Latasha spoke about the lawsuits, but the lack of DEI, she also talked about staff recruitment, and there can be effects there. Also, increased revenue and philanthropy are affected. And so Lawrence Jones with Riskversity is up next with a few stories about these particular issues. Lawrence?
Great, thank you, Vernell. To that point, while this is about companies' bottom line, I know many of you out there are on boards or chair committees for nonprofits. I'm going to give you two examples from a nonprofit standpoint that also impacts their bottom line. Great. So I'll give you a little bit of context around this nonprofit private high school. It's located in an urban neighborhood that is 70% non-white today. When the school was founded, the neighborhood was 90% white. So over time, the demographic around the school has changed, but the environment of the school has remained the same. So the barriers to entry to the school, tuition is very expensive to get in. There's a high standard for academics. And even with need-based scholarships, it is hard to get in into the school. And they've had diverse programming, not strategy, programming for the last decade or so. So as they thought about where they wanted to be from where they are, back in 2018, they developed a DEI strategy that also included the creation and a focused role of a president, somebody that's reporting to the president and the chair. So in 2018, you look at the metrics here, why it's so important. They had 10% diverse student population, 2% diverse staff and faculty, and 1% diverse donor base. As they communicated what their strategy was around DE&I, the environment changed. So as of 2021, they had a 15% diverse student population. This was the largest incoming diverse class. The staff remained at 2% because teachers don't leave very often. So it's hard to replace somebody when they're not leaving. A 9% diverse donor base, which the communication of this had diverse donors taking eye that they could then participate in a school who was kind of first in its class in leading this effort from a DE&I perspective. And the donations of diverse initiatives, they raised $780,000 in a 1.5 year time period. That is the biggest stretch of an annual raise for a particular program function in the history of the school. This shows you how an effective strategy that's communicated appropriately can impact the bottom line of a nonprofit organization. Next slide, please. We'll go to the next level of education in higher ed. At a college, the dean had come in and realized in her assessment that there was diversity programs in place, but the Office of Diversity Programs was not at the right level inside the organization to really stand out that it was really important to the community. The dean moved the program office at the leadership level that was at the same level as all the other deans and administrative reports and departments that really had the ability to weigh in on a variety of things inside the college. So in 2019, that had a 16.9 diverse student population, 14% diverse staff, and faculty, and 11% diverse donor base. In 2021, they had increased their diverse student population to 8.5%. Again, the largest incoming diverse class because they took intentional actions to make sure the diversity was at the right level inside of the college. 14% diverse staff and faculty remained the same because there's a hiring freeze. More importantly, 18% diverse donor base. This is a 7% increase in that time period. What that resulted into is donations for $2.8 million to this college. That ultimately put the college in the black and also allowed them to remove the hiring freeze, which based on this intentionality of DE&I, they will be hiring additional Black and brown professors, student, staff, and faculty to relate and match the base of the student population. Next slide, please. Now we're for the for-profit organizations, and Latasha hit on this in her talk. But talent attraction and retention is key. As she talked about the car lot, right? This is important when you're engaging and trying to attract the right talent, the right folks to your organization. Training is key for your recruiting staff. What is the recruiting strategy? That has to shift. If you can't bring in diverse talent, you have to stop and say, are we doing something right in this process? From a retention perspective, creating ERGs, employee resource groups. Again, Latasha mentioned this, that you have to have that community where folks can relate to one another and talk to each other to create the fabric that inclusion is important and the importance of unity is there. The outcome of these efforts were a diverse staff recruiting increase of 18%, diverse staff attrition decreased 87% because of the ERGs were created. Productivity increased 23%, and ultimately that dropped to the bottom line and increased profitability by 9%. Next slide, please. Here's another example where you have a retail component where it's B2C, and so the company understood that by having a focus on the customers they need to serve, they need to be engaged with that. So that process with the board and leadership strategy was to train leadership to have emotional intelligence, cultural competency. The next move was to put into place a performance management with DEI metrics, not just metrics for the sake of having metrics, but metrics that ultimately impacted compensation. When you play with people's money, they start to be innovative and pay attention. Implementing a zero tolerance policy so that people understand that this is not a game, that we are going to be an inclusive and equitable organization. So the things that we're going to do will align with that. And the outcome from that was productivity increased 12%. And profitability increased, 6%. So in every example here, and there's plenty other that we could share and go on about, that when you have a diverse way of thinking and a diverse and equitable environment and inclusion is there, it drops to your bottom line.
Great, Lawrence. As you're thinking through all this, we know that diversity in staffing doesn't just happen. And so how important is it to have a strategy, to be intentional, especially one with an inclusive focus?
Right. We all hear that, what gets measured gets done. And so if you don't have a plan or a strategy, you're just out there willy-nilly. You're kind of taking the let me check which way the wind is blowing. What is my gut feel of that with no data to really understand, are the things that I'm doing actually working, right? There are things in strategies that you have to tweak along the way because you set out to do A, and A was working, but not to the level that you want it to. So you get additional input, and you may shift that slightly. But you just update your plan and your strategy so that you can measure, your journey to excellence as it relates to diversity, equity, and inclusion.
Gotcha. So if a business owner or nonprofit leader is listening right now and thinking, okay, my staff doesn't really reflect the people that I serve, what's the first step? Research?
Well, you have to assess where you are, right? People feel like they're doing a lot better than they really are, but assess your organization to understand where you are today and is your organization ready for that next move? People try to take steps to implement things that they're not ready for, and ultimately they fail. Then when they fail, they just give up. So having that plan by assessing, figuring out who needs what training and education to be successful in the outcomes is that first step.
Lawrence, thank you. And we'll be back in just a little bit with you to talk even further. But right now, Adrian's up next to explain why diversifying staff is a start, but clearly not enough. There's more that needs to be done. So she has some culture building tips for all organizations. And so Adrian, you are up now.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. I don't need the slides, so Patricia, you can take that one down. I'm just gonna talk to people for a moment. What I'm gonna do is offer you what I think are the first 4 critical steps to culture change. And it begins with the senior leader. And so the first step is really know thyself. That's really how this works. A misalignment of values may make it impossible to increase diversity and help to lead a more inclusive organization. And so you need to ask yourself some critical questions in your private reflection time. What are your values? How do the tenets of diversity and inclusion align with your values, where diversity really means a set of practices that involve a variety of people of different identities, race, gender, ethnicity, sexual orientation, religious belief. Diversity is a variety. And inclusion, right? So how does inclusion align with your values? Where inclusion is creating a place where all of those varieties of people feel that they have a place and opportunities. How do your organization's values align with your values? I have to say, if you are leading an organization where the values aren't in alignment with your own, then we also have a different conversation we can have. But the important thing is that you understand where the alignment is. And then you're going to ask a couple of questions that are going to lead to your next step. What do you know about diversity and inclusion? And what do you need to know about it? And then your second step is that you're going to get to know your business. So pursuing diversity and inclusion is in many ways like any other change you might need to manage. You want to look at your data, as Lawrence pointed out. Trends tell you a lot about who you are, what you value, and how you function. So you want to do that. And then you want to set a goal or 2 or 3 about where you want to be and when, and understand the gap between where you are and where you want to be. And then you yourself have to get ready. Given the self-study of yourself as a human being and the study of your organization, you need to learn what you need to learn. You need to create your own professional and personal development plan. That may mean you need a coach. It may mean you have some professional development courses you might want to take. I have to tell you that reading is insufficient outside of community. So it's going to be important to learn in community, whether it's along with your coach or along with your team. And you also need to reflect on what you need to do to develop the leadership skills to manage organizational change and coach your team. Because your leadership team, if your organization is of the size to have a leadership team, is really going to be the group that helps to initiate this change and perpetuate this change and build your culture. And you need to think about how you're going to manage loss. So most people who are interested in organizational change know that that the change itself is not the thing that causes disruption. It is the loss that people sense that cause the disruption, that there are people who feel like they're going to lose something in this process. And you have to think about what is the culture you want to establish to help people understand that, yes, there may be loss. Here's what I'm taking away, but here's what I'm giving. And for people who are interpreting loss where there is none, helping them to understand that. And finally, well, not finally, but finally for this conversation, it's get your leadership team ready. So everything you just went through to develop yourself, you are now in a position to support your leadership team. You want for them to do their own personal and professional development. You want for them to develop an understanding of the data as you have seen it and help them reinforce or adjust what you've learned. You want for them to have buy-in on your goals, and you want them to coach them as a team. The cultural aspects that you would be laying down are examples for your organization that your development as a human being matters, that the development of the people who report to you matters, that the acknowledgement of the humanity of all the people in your organization is important, and that learning is okay, that it is not an expectation that people be perfect, but that they be engaged in activities to continue to learn and stay curious and ask good questions. Now, this, of course, these are the kinds of things that would apply to any change effort. But the reality is this issue of starting with yourself and your own values is even more important when there are issues that may require you to deal with some of your own biases or misinformation about different cultural or ethnic groups, which is why the data within your organization is important. But during your personal development, you're also going to want to learn about the people who are missing from your organization, because I can guarantee you there's some things about the various groups as groups that you may not know or understand, or you may have misperceptions about. But there are also things about the pool that's available if you are a local organization or if you are a regional organization. There are things about the pool of potential employees that you may not know.
Great, Adrienne, a wealth of information that you have obviously shared. You're really helping us with the E part of DEI, because you can get the diversity there, you can get inclusion, but to really make things equitable, you've got to make that cultural shift. And so you mentioned a lot about pre-work, that individual work that everyone needs to do. But for a person that may be watching this thinking, where do I even begin? Where are the resources? Where do I go? How do I start? What would you say to them?
I would say that if you are the kind of person that needs to do some alone time thinking, I have to tell you, Google is free. It is a great place to start, and I'm going to give you some ideas. The publications that a lot of people trust, the major news outlets, have done a great job this past year of pulling together reading lists. So Forbes has an amazing set of tools that you can use to read and understand and get a sense of where to start. The New York Times has a great list. Harvard Business Review has a great list. And so while reading outside of community is not a good idea, just getting in to see what it is you might want to know. The other thing is that you may need a coach. You may need to be a part of a group that's learning together. So it's worth looking into those options, or maybe if you're a part of an association or a group, asking that group to pull together a team of people who can learn together. But that part is going to be essential. You cannot get started in your organization if you don't know your own blind spots.
Excellent point. And when we come back together as a group, we'll really dig in more on solutions and hope that, while we're on pause, just think about some other resources we could throw out there so we can arm everybody with as much information as possible. Thank you, Adrienne. And so Gwendolyn, get ready, take your camera off, because she's going to close us out with more details on deciphering what does all this really mean? What do we mean when we talk about diversity and equity and inclusion? Also, how do we know when we're getting it right? We talked about staffing and the bottom line, but let's tie it all together with Miss Gwendolyn. So Gwendolyn.
I've got Gwendolyn on the other line. For some reason, again, the magic of telecommunications.
No problem.
She got kicked out and is going to call in.
Okay.
So Renee, we're just going to wait for just a second for her. It'll take her a minute to call in.
Sure.
And then she'll manage to do this.
It's fine. We could actually go back to Adrienne for a bit, because I know after she got off, she was probably thinking, oh, I should have given that resource. But if there's just something off the top of your head, at least for our local Memphis area folks, a source, you know, obviously you're definitely a reputable source for folks and have helped a number of people kind of navigate their way through this topic. But if you have any additional resources or places you can direct people, we would greatly appreciate it.
So I would direct people to Policy Link. So Policy Link has this wonderful report on the kind of blueprint for corporations or businesses in pursuing equity. Policy Link really does focus on equity, and they have a wonderful resource for that. I know we'll be following up with attendees with a list of resources, and Patricia helped with all sorts of great articles, and I also have some additional resources to use. One of the things that you may want is more evidence about the relationship between diversity and inclusion and your bottom line. And there's a great deal of research on that. So we'll be sharing an article, a report written by Accenture on the relationship between having a diverse group around ability status and how that leads to greater profits. And then another report from McKinsey that lays out the considerable gap in a good way between organizations that are more racially and ethnically diverse and have greater gender diversity and those who do not. So basically being more diverse, having a more inclusive environment, focusing on diversity across identity, race, ethnicity, gender, disability status, all leads to greater profits.
Absolutely. And you know, sometimes we forget that this equity, inclusion, it means more than just race.
Right.
You know, a lot of us think about race first, but there are so many other areas that we have to touch on and learn about. And so as Gwendolyn gets lined up there, I did want to mention, because you brought up, Adrienne, that the Greater Chamber is a source for research. Mm-hmm. And so as members, we can all reach out to the Greater Chamber and get information that can help us with our work. So that's definitely one excellent resource that we all have available to us. And so Gwendolyn, you are back with us. Welcome back. So if you want to go ahead and share with us more on what DEI means and how we know when we're getting it right. Thank you.
Absolutely. And thank you so much for your patience. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Great, great. Hey, as we talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion, and my panelists have just done a wonderful job. So Latasha, Lawrence, and Adrienne, thank you so very much. As we talk about boosting the bottom line, and as we talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion, I would like to add in another element, which is shown on the next page. And that page is sensitivity. Actually, both Lawrence, actually every panelist already has talked about this piece around sensitivity. And I will contend with you that we may have diversity, inclusion, and equity, but an element that may be missing and that needs to be there is sensitivity, because without the proper blend, an organization dies slowly from within. And so let's talk a little bit about what those 4 elements are on the next slide. So we have diversity, inclusion, equity, and sensitivity. And I kind of like to think of it this way, as my former panelists and co-panelists have mentioned, that diversity is having a seat at the table. Inclusion is actually having a voice at that table. And for that voice to be valued is around that equity piece. And then that sensitivity part is that cultural competence and sensitivity in terms of being connected to the organization, which Latasha talked really about in great length. And as we talk about diversity, I like to think and talk about diversity from an employee base, a customer base, as well as a supplier base, to take a more holistic approach to how diversity can be used as a lever to move the organization forward and to boost the bottom line. As it relates to inclusion, oftentimes when we look at to determine how included and to get a pulse on how included our employees feel, usually it's an engagement survey, it's employee satisfaction survey or culture survey. Those kinds of things are the things that we look at I will share though that oftentimes companies will do engagement or employee surveys, usually 12 to 18 months apart, which in my estimation is a little bit farther. That what we get on an employee or engagement survey is really a lagging indicator. And there are other leading indicators that really all of the panelists have already spoken to. And around that customer base, nobody can really argue with a diverse customer base wanting more of the types of customers that we can serve and do so profitably. And usually that is measured in your customer satisfaction and retention numbers, right? And I will contend to you that how we treat our customers or how we treat our employees are reflected in how our employees treat our customers. And for those nonprofits who are around the table, when we talk about a diverse customer base, I think of grants and funding sources, those kinds of things. And then of course, around that supplier base as well, we're always looking for innovative solutions to help us to move the ball forward. And so the question is, to what degree are you including diverse suppliers in your efforts and in your company? And I think it was I think Lawrence mentioned this, maybe it was Tasha, talked about the MWBEs and the percentage of diverse suppliers that you're using. And then around this equity piece, I think of equity as equity in pay, but also in promotions as well. So once they come in the door and getting paid, how you come in the door, how you show up and get paid, equity there, promotions, but also projects and plum assignments. Because that's where folks get visibility, they grow their influence, they grow their image within an organization, and actually get exposure within the organization. And then that sensitivity part, it really speaks to that cultural competence that I know Adrian talked about and spoke about, and that Latasha explained about that supportive, empathetic environment. And the cultural competence, that sensitivity part, it goes beyond just sensitivity to where it means to really not only understand and appreciate, but to be able to work well with others from backgrounds that are different, who have different backgrounds and beliefs than your own. And the sensitivity part is where your core values actually come to life. It's not just in print and on paper, but they come alive in the sensitivity part. And so as we move forward and we talk more on the next slide, and we talk about how all this blends together, diversity, inclusion, equity, and sensitivity to boost our bottom line, it really does hinge on how we engage our people and engage with our people. Our human capital are assets that are not reflected and shown on the balance sheet, but they do show up in productivity and profitability, which have been mentioned earlier. And so to boost your bottom line, to increase and to build your bottom line is what you do with your people. How you leverage what's in your people to help move productivity and ultimately profitability to actually boost your bottom line.
Awesome. Thank you, Gwendolyn. And so it was really interesting to see the inclusion of sensitivity. That's something unique that is not often brought into the conversation about DEI. So grateful for you doing that. And really, it sounds like what you're talking about is a holistic approach to the work. And so if you could explain just how important it is to include everything and not leave out one of these buckets.
For sure, Renee, thank you. As I'm a visual learner, and I'm also a big Stephen Covey fan. And one of the habits of highly effective people is to begin with the end in mind. And it's very hard to begin with the end in mind and paint a picture of where you're going if you only have part or piece of it. And so it's very important to take a look, a holistic approach, and look at the big picture, the full picture from a strategic standpoint, so that you can develop and implement those things that are sustainable.
Makes perfect sense. And so if I could ask all the panelists to take off, to put on their cameras and mics, and we took down the presentation just for us to have a real conversation. When you think about it, we'd be remiss if we didn't mention that just 1 year ago today is when George Floyd was killed. And that really, for some people, illuminated DEI. For some people, they were talking about it for the very first time ever. And for some, it kind of said, now I need to really think about it. I may have known it was necessary, but now I'm really going to do something. So how has the focus on DEI increased in your mind, philanthropy, business, et cetera, over the past year? And do you believe this growth is sustainable, or is this something that will be here today and forgotten about tomorrow?
Well, for me, my hope is that it's sustainable. And for us and for me, especially being on a college campus, our client, our customer are the students. And with everything that has been happening, I've been really impressed by our students being able to find their voice during all of this, and that we were able as a university to really say we need to respond to the fact that this is how our students feel. And so, we have started the Eradicating Systemic Racism initiative, and we're doing hard work, but we recognize that there are things we're going to have to put in place to make it sustainable, right? And that doesn't happen overnight. And a lot of times people are expecting those changes to be immediate. And you have to explain, we're working toward it. We've got some goals, but we got to take baby steps, right? And any step forward we take is better than staying where we are. And so I really do hope that it's sustainable. I think one of the things is that we all have to keep in mind is that in this environment, we also have to respect diversity of thought and figure out how to navigate that too, right? So I believe DEI is important, but I might be having a conversation with somebody sitting right next to me who does not understand, does not believe it's important, and honestly doesn't think it should be anything that the university, a public entity, should spend this money toward, right? Because they're taxpayers. And so I have to respect their thoughts as well. And so we have to figure out how to have those conversations and navigate them in a way that we can all come to, an agreement. It's not going to be an agreement, but some kind of compromise that makes sure that all of the voices of your constituents, whether for me, like I said, it's my students, it's my faculty, it's my staff, but whether it's your suppliers, your vendors, and your employees, and that you're making sure that you're embracing DEI, you're not also excluding others who don't embrace it. Mm-hmm. And I'm not the expert on that. I'm sure Adrian or Gwendolyn have some thoughts on that, and Lawrence. But that's just something that I see sometimes, in that we're really wanting to ramp up our DEI initiatives, but those initiatives in themselves can make others feel excluded. And so how do you navigate that?
Gosh, thank you. And Gwendolyn has her hand up, ready to go. So you all just jump in where you fit in so we can keep the conversation flowing.
Okay, great. And please pardon me for not having my video on. I actually had to go back to an old piece of equipment. But anyway, thank you. As I was doing quite a bit of diversity work and developing the blueprint for an organization I was a part of, I stumbled upon a quote, and it said, "Embarking upon a diversity initiative takes either great vision or great pain." Mm. And in the last year or so, we have felt the pain. We have heard the pain. And my hope is that this will be sustainable without the pain. But it's not that it hasn't been there in the past. It's just that the pain wasn't severe enough. And as someone said to me, that until the pain of staying exceeds the pain of leaving, no change will be sustained. No change will be made. And so that would be my take on it. My hope is that it will continue, but you have to be intentional to make it happen.
Fair. Adrian and Lawrence?
I'm going to say I'm not a particularly hopeful person in general in life, but I will say this: I am incredibly pragmatic. And one of the things about particularly diversity and inclusion is that it really is a way to make more money. And I am one of those people who is kind of an adherent to interest convergence, this idea that if we just put it in black and white terms, for people who, for Black people to make progress, it also has to be in the interest of white people. And so this idea of interest convergence is really powerful to me. Some people say it's pessimistic. But the reality is that because we live in a country that is largely racially and ethnically segregated, it means that people of different races and ethnicities arrive with very different ways of seeing the world, with different mental models, with different approaches to solutions. And it is bottom line fact, according to science, that the more diversity you have in thinking, in your mental models, in your approaches to solutions, in your understanding of the world, the better your solutions, the better your products, the better your innovations. And so from that perspective, if you institutionalize diversity because you want to make more money, then those things will stick. What will be more challenging is the larger societal issues of equity that don't necessarily have bottom line benefits. But where business is concerned, if you're focusing internally on your organization and on your marketplace, it's better for you. Conversely, for businesses that are pressed to think about equity outside of their organizations in terms of their impact on communities and environmental issues, then you're going to have a much bigger challenge.
Understood. And Lawrence, do you agree with all the ladies, the only male on the panel today, representing well though?
Yes, I agree. And more to Latasha's tune of kind of the risk person, I feel like it can be sustainable. The money part, as Adrian mentioned, is there. And I think people are starting to see that. But I think the power of the money part in the consumer side, that in the economy, the shift of dollar spend is starting to gradually change. And so as the consumer who's spending the money changes, that power shifts. So I think the struggle in that sustainability is going to be the transition of power, right? We're seeing that in voting things and other things that are happening around the country, because the foresight is that power shift is coming. And so what we try to do in our work is to communicate, allyship, in that, these things aren't happening to you, but happening with you. I kind of take the wall down. If we all really take the process of thinking that we can all make more, in business, if we're equitable in doing this, and I know it's hard to think that way in our society, but as I think things shift, folks will then be challenged to make the change. They're going to get left behind. You're seeing like McDonald's came out with a pretty huge statement where it's not just supplier diversity for them. They're making this work a part of the compensation structure for all the leaders in the organization, and not a small piece of their compensation. It's very impactful. So that innovation of thought and mind was kind of being forced. I think when you have large institutions who have their hands in a lot of different things are making that wave, it's that peer pressure, others will start to follow. So I'm hopeful and encouraged that this can be sustainable. And my last point there is I also believe, as you watch the news and you see some of the protests, the diversity of the crowd that is infuriated by what's happening in our country isn't all black and brown crowd. So that in and of itself is encouraging that the movement of the next generation is going to help us be more equitable, inclusive, and diverse as a society and in business and nonprofit work.
So I'll ask all the panelists, do you think it matters about the why? Does it matter if a business's primary or only reason for engaging in DEI strategy is for the purpose of improving their bottom line? Do you think that employees would see that as not being authentic? And does that matter?
I'm going to say it matters. It matters to some degree, in part because it's hard to lead a change you don't believe in. But at the same time, I think that in the sense that you can also build the road while you walk it, right? You do it to believe it. And so getting started with the work of even understanding the reason why this question about what are your values, even if you don't fully value it, you do value the bottom line. So what are the things you can do as you learn more about it? Because you're also not going to be successful with inclusion if you don't have some belief in the shared humanity of all the people involved, right? If you aren't willing to do that, you're not going to be successful with inclusion. You're going to waste a lot of money on diversity. But I think that it's important to get started.
Great. And Gwendolyn, good to see you.
Thank you. I would like to chime in on that too, in terms of the why. Very important, because the why is what motivates us, right? It's our fire, it fuels us. And people know if we don't believe it, because we behave what we believe. And we will not be able to be consistent in doing something that we really don't believe.
Well put, Latasha.
Yeah, going back to something that Lawrence said about the societal peer pressure for larger organizations, thinking about the why just reminds me of several years ago when a lot of corporations were requiring that their law firms be diverse before they would give them their business, and requiring that there be a person of color, a minority, a woman, or something that would be assigned to their billable work. And at the time I was thinking, you got all these law firms going out and running. I mean, I remember actually talking to a law firm that said, oh, we're looking for a Spanish speaking Mexican. And I was like, okay, I don't fit that bill, but it made me think, we've got all these law firms going out here probably trying to hire a minority so that they can get this business, right? So that's the why. And that's not right. But then as I thought about it more, it gave an opportunity for a lot of attorneys of color who would not otherwise have been hired by those firms to get that door open, to walk through it, and hopefully leave it ajar for some other people to come behind them. And so that started making me think, the why is it important? Yes, it's important, but sometimes it's just a means to an end. It gets to, like Adrian said, it gets us started.
First step. Mm-hmm. And so Lawrence, I saw you shaking your head. So you agree that that is a good first step, even if your why may not be aligned with purpose, deeper purpose.
Agreed, yes.
Okay. So as we kind of go deeper into this conversation, I think we mentioned earlier, Adrian and I were having a side chat about race and whether DEI, when people are thinking about it, are we only thinking about race? And what else should we be thinking about? How do you advise people on how to broaden that lens to ensure we're thinking further than just race? We're thinking about economics, we're thinking about gender preferences, all of those different things. Not gender preferences,
yeah.
Pronoun preferences.
Pronoun preferences. So I would say that when you're doing your goal setting and really looking at data, if you're thinking about equity and you're looking at the pool of your potential employees and you're looking at your client or customer base, and you think about to what degree your organization is going to reflect those groups, the pool or your client base, then you have to think about all the different ways that those groups are diverse. So you want to be able to reflect that, which means you're going to look at race, yes, ethnicity. You're going to look at gender. You're going to look at ability, status, and sexual orientation, religious beliefs, right? You're going to really think about the ways that your organization reflects the people who you draw from and the people you serve. And that is really where a lot of the diversity work may matter in places, quite frankly, like Memphis, that while we are diverse, we do have two primary racial groups. And there's a great deal of diversity within those racial groups. So you can achieve what looks like great racial ethnic numbers and still not have a truly diverse employment policy or employee group, because the group doesn't really reflect the diversity that's in your customer base or your client. So just being Black is great if you want to just check that box, but if you really want to check diversity and all of the ways it's reflected, then you're going to have some more layered approaches.
Recommendations on how to get that layered approach. And Latasha, if I feel free if you have something else to comment on that.
I was just going to make a comment that, thinking about diversity, I prefer the term that Gwendolyn uses of cultural competency. I've just found that the term diversity has this negative connotation and people automatically go to race. But when you use the term culture, they're a little bit more open to thinking, oh, it's beyond race, right? And there are so many other things that we have to think about. And, to Adrian's point, thinking about who are your customers and who do you have as your customer base now, and who do you want to reach, and what are the characteristics that they have? We're educating, right now, we're not educating just primarily immediate high school grads, right? So we have a very diverse student base that covers all gamut. Those students won't come if they don't see people who look like them, who can share their beliefs. We have, a couple of months ago, I think we had a faculty member go viral because she was allowing, well, it was before COVID, so it was over a year ago. She was allowing she allowed a student to bring her child to class. Well, she's a mother and she understands the struggles of that. And so that's diversity in itself. And so just thinking about all of those things that your customer base, all of their attributes can help you think about it larger.
Excellent.
I'd also too like to chime in, Renee, as well, because what happens is, as we talk about what kind of diversity, we can have either small diversity or large diversity, and we've talked about all those different kinds. And I encourage people to start with the type of talent you need in your organization, and where do you go to get that talent, and to not judge exterior dimensions of diversity. In terms of who has that talent. For instance, I spent a lot of my corporate time in manufacturing environments. And at the time when we were looking for more engineers, there were more women who were graduating. And we did not have many female engineers in the organization. So now that there's a shift to where is your talent that you're going to need not only now, but in the future? And how do you go get that talent? And how do you take the blinders off and create new avenues and pipelines to get the talent that you need to get closer to a better business future?
Wonderful point, Gwendolyn. And once that talent comes, then the question is the talent comfortable when they get there? And so I just wanted to ask all of you, as Black and Brown people, when you go into the workplace and you've worked throughout your career and you've faced instances where you are the only one, how has that been for you, and how did you work through it in order to succeed in your respective fields? And I'll start with Latasha, because as an attorney, I'll just assume you have a number of experiences that you can share there.
Yeah, so starting law school, there were probably, I would always say, 20 of us in the building at any time that were non-Caucasian, right? And so that was an environment where, and for me, that wasn't as much of an issue, but starting in the practice of law, I started as a single Black female mother at a law firm where there were only white men and 3 white women. And so I think the most important thing, and I've talked to other law firms who've asked the question, how do we retain our Black talent? They don't feel comfortable, they don't stay, they leave. And I think it is about creating an environment where people feel like they can be their authentic selves, right? And that's not always easy for people to do. And I think it also requires some strength within an individual to navigate that. I've been everything from the court reporter to the bookkeeper when I go places. And it's not even just other people. I remember getting my first paycheck at the law firm and going through the bank to the bank teller, who was a Black female, who said, how do you like being a bookkeeper at that law firm? And I said, well, why do I have to be a bookkeeper? But think about it, in her world, she had never seen a Black female attorney. So it wasn't possible. And so it's not always easy to navigate. I think you have to be secure in your own value and worth. Like I said, being your authentic self and being clear about what you will and will not put up with. But I will be honest, I had this conversation with my boss the other week. Even though I feel like I'm accomplished, I feel like I'm very competent in my job, I always do feel like I have to go over and beyond, right? Because I'm a Black female, and I feel like I'll be judged differently because of that, and that the standards are much higher for me. And that's unfortunate, but that's the reality that we live in. And so I think for employers, one of the things that they need to figure out, especially if you don't have a diverse environment, is figuring out and I think Lawrence said this, who are the people who can be good allies? You know, for me going into my law firm, I was the only minority, but there were 2 attorneys who were the best allies. And to this day, we are still friends. I just saw them last week. And, you know, they were the best allies I could have ever hoped for. And so they were my allies, my sponsors, and my champions, right? And so if you're trying to integrate somebody into an environment that you already know is not diverse, you know, you need to help them by setting up that framework for them so that they can be successful.
That's
powerful.
Please, Lawrence.
I can jump in here. So I started my career out in the accounting space, right? So that was white male, right? So Latasha mentioned, you know, going to college, there were 2 Black people in the accounting classes at my university. And so it looked very similar when I started into a Big 4 accounting firm. But to the point of having allies and champions there, I was fortunate enough to be put with 2 folks who really cared about my development because of me and what I could do from that standpoint. So when they launched their own firm, I was the first call that, hey, will you come work with us? We can't pay the same amount, but we'll take care of you along the way. And by golly, they are the most impressive people. When I decided to leave that firm, they supported me, switching from accounting to insurance industry, another white male dominated, you know, industry. Their clients, we launched a new business together, you know, outside of that. So find the allies, and they're not always look like you, but folks who have influence and can stand up for you while you're out of the room, as they would if you were in the room, is very important. Very important to have. It's being comfortable in yourself, being your authentic self. You know, shining. Yes, we always feel like we have to work harder and go 125%. It's it's hard to turn that off. It's just who we are because that's how we had to be scrappy in what we're doing. But I think people appreciate and know that when they put you on a task, you're going to shine, and that gives confidence for those people who may be on the fence about whether or not, you know, inclusion, you know, in equity and equitable, you know, performance measures are there. We help kind of open the door and pave the way as we go through it.
You and Latasha both talked about being better than the best in order to kind of move forward in that environment. I'm curious, as Black business owners, do you feel that same type of pressure to compete for contracts and that kind of work? I know I do. Do you all feel that same way?
All day, every day. I mean, we get asked questions about your work history, who you've done this for, that our counterparts, they don't ask those questions. Here's the contract. And so they're not negotiating, trying to push your price down. I definitely see that in this space as well. We have to continue to go above and beyond and be scrappy more than our counterparts, doing actually doing less than we do on a day-to-day basis.
So scrutiny, Adrian and Gwendolyn, do you feel scrutinized?
I'll respond. I know Adrian has a response. I will respond. One of the things that I do is I promote, yes, sometimes I do feel scrutinized, but what I seek to do is to show how I can add value. I also have certain criteria around who I work with, right? So every client is not a client, right? Every prospect is not. And so I'm very specific and strategic about that because I want to do work with people who want to do work with me, right? And so, you know, there are times when do I feel scrutinized? Absolutely. Am I asked the extra question? Absolutely. But I answer it, right? And I give them what I believe that they're looking for because at the end of the day, if they don't, they have to trust me and trust the process to bring me on board. So that's kind of how I address it.
Great. And Adrian, you know, and I know you want to respond to that question as well, but can you also add what suggestions you have for business owners or organization leaders that may be listening that may not have even realized that maybe that additional question was scrutiny? They just didn't realize how it hit and felt to the person they were asking.
So I have to be honest, I have not experienced that. I think I have a very privileged position in my field of expertise. that my network has made it possible for me not to have to deal with that. But I have seen it. I have seen it when I make referrals. So even the network that implicitly trusts me and the client that implicitly trusts me, I realize I have to do extra work when recommending an organization that's led by or staffed by mostly Black people. And so I have witnessed it. And what I have said to them in those instances is, well, let's talk about how you bring people in as contractors. Let's talk about what that looks like. Do you have a standardized set of questions? Do you require of everyone? Can you think of an example where you didn't require that? And it's usually me. And I say, well, if you didn't require that of me, why do you need it? Because are you dissatisfied with the work? And if you didn't require it of me, why do you not trust this recommendation I'm making? And it sets off all sorts of light switches for them in their biases and the way that they're approaching things. I actually wanted to go back to the question about experience too. That I was basically run out of academia in no uncertain terms. And I quit after being hospitalized for anxiety and all sorts of things because I felt like I constantly compared to an organ being rejected. Like I was put in the institution because the institution needed my field of expertise. They needed the diversity, needed those things, but I was pushed out by all of my colleagues and the institution. But the reason I stayed 1 year longer than I planned to was because of leadership. That leadership made a change and put someone in a position who could literally protect me. And I felt protected. I felt that I wasn't going to be treated unjustly or yelled at in meetings or all of those things. And when I saw that protection about to go away, I quit because I knew that it had been institutionalized. But leadership has the power to shift an environment by drawing very clear boundaries about what is and is not acceptable. And I think that that is what leaders need to do.
Great feedback. So we have great, Dottie joined us.
Guys,
So you have a question from the audience, I guess.
I do. I have a couple of questions. One actually is for me because I started in my industry as one of 4 women recruiters in information technology in before you were born time frame. And the way that I could get my toehold in the world was to reach out to a partner, to someone else who was successful, who didn't look like me, and to be able to give me a few suggestions. And I think the hardest thing, this is kind of a comment and a question, the hardest thing for all of us who are different in some way, whether it's me or you, Black, brown, white, Jewish, whatever, is to not be afraid to ask for help and to be able to reach out. Please comment on that for the rest of us, because it's a tough pill for those of us who are strong to say, I can't do this by myself. Latasha?
You're muted.
Oops, you're muted.
You know, my experience is different in that, honestly, I don't know, Dottie, that I've had to reach out for help too much. I've been in situations where, like I said, I was blessed to be comfortable enough with myself that I was able to get done what I needed to get done, and to garner the respect that I needed to garner. You know, I think that people have recognized my competency and my abilities, and that was respected once we got past a certain point, right? Now, what I might have had to ask for help with sometimes is understanding personalities so that I could navigate waters. You know, so law firms can be a political environment, you know, corporate can be a political environment, academia, as Adrian knows, can be a very political environment. And so making sure I had those people in my corner that I trusted, who I could have frank conversations with about personalities, how to navigate those personalities, and how to how to relate to people. The other thing that I found too is, for me, is determining, once I determine that, is the help that I'm asking for, is making sure that my employees maybe are stepping up in ways that I can't, because they can relate better to somebody than I can, or that person will receive the information better from that person than me. And so I remember even practicing law. I was representing a small town, and there was a concern about some of the comments that had been made, that a Black female attorney was retained to hire that city council. And the adjuster said to me, you know, I'm really concerned about sending you there and for your safety. And I said, I'm good. I said, but if you're concerned, then this is the person who can go with me. And this, because I know this person will make them feel more comfortable. And so that was the help that I asked for.
I'd like to comment a little bit on the asking for help, because sometimes when we're new, or we don't know what we don't know, right? And I know that one of the things that we did in an organization, I'm a recovering accountant and CPA like Lawrence is, but we had a mentoring program to where we helped people create an environment to develop a have an avenue to be able to ask for help. How do you get acclimated to the city? How do you, you can, so basically permission to have that conversation with people. And so we created an environment where it was okay to say, you know what, I don't know, but can you help me find this? And I personally believe that goes back to that sensitivity, that cultural competence piece of it is being able to reach out, and then finding a friend, a professional work friend, someone that we trust and can confide in.
Perfect. So Dottie, to the panel, I think we're nearing the end. So we do have one more question. Okay, go right ahead. You're muted, Dottie.
I'm muted. I didn't know if you're fine. We've got a few more minutes because I know you've got a question, but do Adrian or Lawrence want to comment on that? Adrian's got her hand up.
So yes, I did want to comment on that, but I also wanted to make sure we answered the diversity training question. So what my answer is that what you're talking about is in many ways classified as sponsorship, and the idea of finding someone with the power and the access and the relationships to help usher you from one place to the next. I think that the reason why I'm so well positioned business-wise right now is because of the army of sponsors I have had since my teenage years. And I have to say, every single one of my sponsors has been a white man of considerable age. And so that is one of the reasons why I know that this work can happen, because many of them had zero relationships with Black women in their lives, but they were able to recognize that I was someone worth supporting. And quite frankly, our relationships have changed a lot about their lives. It works among the opposite direction as well. For leaders who are trying to do something with their organizations, if you don't know, if you are a white leader who has no idea how to approach this, but you have relationships with people of color, Black, Latin, Asian, who are well knowledgeable about this, find yourself somebody who can really open the door for you and help you get to the other side of this issue. That's my answer to that question. May I answer the diversity training question?
Lawrence, do you want to chime in on that one, or you want to move to the next question? Go question. Renee, it's all yours. I'll be quiet.
Oh, no, you were fine. Well, let me get to the question that came in from the audience, because now the chat has moved a bit. But the question we received was, when your employees are apprehensive about diversity training, how do you get them to see the importance of embracing it so our company culture can change?
Now I can answer, because I totally want to answer this question. So I am fundamentally anti-diversity training, but that doesn't mean I don't think people need to learn. I think that I am absolutely pro-organizational learning. And what that means is, as a leader, you have to do the work to understand, again, who you are, what you have to learn, what you need. And I think it's important to have your leadership team develop an understanding of what their teams need and really take an approach that's around organizational learning that's specific to people's needs. Just some blanket diversity training isn't going to get you anywhere. There's no evidence that there are any returns to it. In fact, one of the links I included has that in there. But if you are really trying to help people understand how to get better results, how to improve their departmental culture as part of a larger organizational shift, then it is possible to create more specific learning opportunities as you need them as part of your change effort.
Sure. And to keep,
And I think,
oh, go ahead. If you want to answer that
I
one.
was going to say,
another one.
I'm going to piggyback on that one. We don't like to tee it up as diversity training either, right? It's really what, Adrian mentioned was, it's development, right? It's employee engagement. It's amongst that whole piece that a good leader should understand how to work with any and everybody. And so if you think about a football coach, to go to a sports on the guy on the panel, that coach has to understand as a head coach, what are his weaknesses? So if he's not a good offensive coach, he better sure find, a good offensive minded coordinator to be that support for that team. And then what players do you need to reach your goal, which everybody wants to do the Super Bowl, right? But what do you need on your team to make that? Are you a team that runs the ball? So you need big linemen to block well. You're a team that passes the ball. You need fast receivers. All those things are the same in the business environment. Understand who you are today, where you want to go, what are your goals you're trying to achieve, and make sure your team understands the development aspect of that. You need different types of people on your team to make that happen.
You sound like a coach. Thank you. Thank you for.
I would, Renee, I would like to chime up on the training part. I do take a different stance on the training part.
Sure. And then we have 2 more questions and we're out.
Okay. And I think I always start with definitions, right, around the training piece. From my perspective, the training or that conversation or learning, whatever you call it, it's really just the beginning of the conversation. Because sometimes people want to look at training as a silver bullet to cure all the problems that have been going on in the organization. But it's really the beginning of the conversation. And so now how do we transfer what we're learning in this classroom and this environment to make it so that it's transformative? And so that's the tack I take on training, that it's part of the process of transformation to get where you want to go.
So a step in the process. Understood. And Michael asked, if we have time, as it pertains to nonprofits, speak to the importance of including DEI, and he included S, Gwendolyn, into the mission, strategic plans, and pro formas. So if we could have one panelist respond to that one.
I'll respond. I'd like to share I like to use a version of the KISS principle to keep it strategic and sustainable. And even in a nonprofit organization, you have metrics that you measure, by which you measure success, right? And so the question is, how can diversity, inclusion, equity, and sensitivity help you move the needle so that you get closer to your end goal and that brighter future that you're seeking? I hope that shed some light. Someone else wants to add to that?
Understood. We're actually gonna, and I think, like they're giving you the thumbs up that you summed it up well for the team. So if we could wrap up by just asking, what one message do you hope that participants walk away with today after listening to this discussion? And then we'll toss back to Dottie and Patricia.
I'll say, do your own work first. That's my first message, because that's the best place to start.
Self-awareness is key.
Self-awareness and company awareness. Know where you are, know where your company is, so you have a foundation to start your learning process and your journey on DE&I.
I would say there's been a lot shared, and I'll just share this. Dorian Spears, I first heard her say, based on what you've heard today and what you're gleaning from this, what is your next most spectacular step? And so what I would encourage you to do is to write down, what did you glean from the conversation today in terms of how it can help you, and then prioritize. So what's my next most spectacular step from there is what I would encourage folks to do.
Great ending point. And to that, with that, thanks to our esteemed panelists, you all, for just your time and your talent sharing with so many people on the line. And it was an honor personally to serve with you and just be a part of this discussion today. And so we'll turn things over now to Dottie and Patricia to wrap us up. Thank you.
My next most important step is to thank you five. This has been enlightening. It has been delightful. I wish that we could stay forever and listen to you guys, and I thank you. For everyone who attended. Our speakers' contact information was at the beginning, but we'll get it back to you. Can't thank you enough for your time and your talent, and your treasure is amazing, all of you. For the Small Business Council, please, everyone, our next meeting is June the 17th. It's going to be a panel discussion, actually a roundtable discussion. We're going to put you all to work and talking about productivity. It's going to be fun. It will be the first time we've done a Zoom panel roundtable discussion. In August, strategic networking. And in September, we're going to try to tackle the next normal, because we all
Small
are,
businesses.
we are living it. We are living it. Many thanks again to everyone. Patricia, I'm going to let you close it out for us.
Thank you all so much. This is just one example of what our think tank creates. We convene, they tell us, well, this is what we need to talk about. These are topics that really matter to small businesses. So thank you so much to the think tank. Renee is one of those members. So thank you, Renee, for your leadership. And thank you, everybody. Have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thank you, everybody, so very much.